collaboration with the Cyprus Mayor. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we talk to the Brexit editor of The Economist.
Pulling out of your largest trading bloc is unlikely to benefit your economy. On the other hand, to leave with no deal at all would clearly be very bad for British citizens and indeed for European citizens.
Nicosia's mayor is trying to clean up the old city.
We started 2 or 3 months ago with door-to-door collection of glass bottles from the pedestrian area. It's not, I'm sorry to say, working very well because the owners of the shops, the restaurants and bars are not cooperating as we had hoped.
And what makes for successful peace negotiations? We talk to the Eurasia Regional Director of the Centre for Humanitarian Dialogue.
I think one of the key elements in any peace process is that the public needs to be involved along the way, not just at the end with a referendum.
On last week's programme, we spoke to several of the panellists at The Economist's 14th Cyprus Summit held recently in Nicosia. While I was there, I caught up with John Peet. He's the political and Brexit editor of The Economist, and he was in Cyprus to chair that summit. Brexit, it's got to be that we're talking about, because all the other people we've spoken to about this conference have been talking really about energy, the economy and Cyprus in particular. Now, I know that Brexit has an impact for Brits living in Cyprus and for Cypriots living in the UK, but I'm interested more to know how you view the fact that this deal or no deal question seems to be going on and on and on, presumably to the detriment of an end result of whatever type.
I mean, I think the negotiations have been very tortured. Perhaps that was predictable because to leave the European Union is an incredibly complicated, complex operation, as British ministers have discovered. And I think in the European Union, I'm afraid we have to accept that things are always done at the last minute. And I think that will happen with the question of what sort of withdrawal deal the UK agrees, and the even more difficult question of whether that deal can go through the British Parliament. It creates uncertainty for citizens, it creates uncertainty for businesses, it's not good for the economy, but it's the way the politics are working.
So what do you expect the outcome to be for the average person in the UK?
Well, I think Brexit is likely to do economic damage, but it's not going to be, this is not the end of the world, as some people have put it. But pulling out of your largest trading bloc is unlikely to benefit your economy. On the other hand, to leave with no deal at all would clearly be very bad for British citizens and indeed for European citizens, British citizens in other European countries as well. And my forecast would be that we will avoid that because it is such a bad outcome that there is likely to be a deal. And the deal should then produce a position where people continue to benefit from free trade with the European Union, but in a less open way than today. That will not be good for either side.
And what about immigration? Because that seems to be the sort of buzzword that really kicked this whole thing off and brought about the Let's Get Out referendum.
I think there's a lot to play for on immigration. I mean, the immigration issue clearly played a very big role in the referendum, but it's interesting that since then, net immigration from the European Union has fallen very sharply, and the net immigration into the United Kingdom is now from the rest of the world, not from Europe. But it still is a big political issue, and it will be an issue in the relationship between Britain and the European Union after Brexit. I think that there is likely to be a favourable regime for European Union migrants into the UK, because it seems to me it'll be in the interests of business and everybody else on both sides.
It does seem that there wasn't a good understanding of the fact that if you look around the world, it's very often immigrants who create the business, create the jobs, boost the economy, and we don't seem to have grasped that.
No, well, immigration is an emotional issue above all. And I mean, interestingly, the Migration Advisory Committee in Britain that published a report 3 weeks ago was absolutely clear that migrants from the rest of the European Union have been beneficial to the public finances and to the economy of the UK, much more so than migrants from outside the European Union. Unfortunately, I think in terms of public opinion, this distinction doesn't work. It's just people say there are too many immigrants and we want to reduce the numbers. But the numbers are in fact falling now, partly because the British economy is not doing so well. So I think the political salience of the migration issue is likely to fall, but the issue is still going to be a big topic between Britain and the European Union.
And of course the business community is going to have to pick up the bits, isn't it? Because, I mean, we look at things like the aviation industry. What's going to happen about that?
Well, again, I mean, in a no-deal situation, that would be very bad for all business, and the aviation industry is not the only industry that would suffer. My assumption is that both sides will avoid that, and that aviation will continue much as it does now. And indeed, a lot of what the British government has talked about during the last 2 years since the referendum is trying to preserve things more or less as they are. That's difficult to do in a situation when Britain is leaving the EU, but I think that with common sense on both sides, the disruption could be kept to a minimum.
And what happens if whatever deal is decided upon gets voted down by Parliament?
Well, politics is an unpredictable game. I think an outcome where Parliament rejects a deal would upset British politics completely, probably lead to a change of Prime Minister, conceivably lead to an election. So, you know, the next few months are going to be politically extremely difficult and clearly very bad for business because it will only create more uncertainty. My prediction would still be there will be a deal and that it will go through, but I wouldn't like to put too much money on that.
That's John Peet, political and Brexit editor of The Economist, who was in Cyprus recently to chair The Economist's 14th Cyprus summit.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Nicosia Municipality is extending its health and safety scheme that includes underground rubbish bins in public places. We've had them for a while on the top of the old city walls. Now they are being put into the old part of central Nicosia. Joining us is Nicosia's Mayor, Konstantinos Yorkakis. Konstantinos, explain how these bins work, because it's much nicer to have just a small thing on the pavement that can take a massive amount of rubbish underneath. But it's also, I think, for recyclables, is it?
Yes, that's one of the advantages, okay? You expressed two advantages of the underground bins. Optically, you have a very small surface, or you don't see those very dirty, ugly, green
Skevalodochia, the wheelie bins.
Full of garbage. So that's an amazing advantage. And secondly, they have a lot more capacity. So that's the advantage. The disadvantage would be that they need cleaning. Being bigger, it means that it takes longer for us to go clean them because it takes longer to fill up. And so they need better hygienic control, if you wish, which makes it a little bit expensive. And also it requires a specific system of unloading the garbage. All in all, I think if you put this in a scale, I think the benefits outweigh the costs. And that's why we're proceeding to put some more. We started in 2012 with 5 points where we placed 9 underground bins, which I think you mentioned, I think in Xenieru and in Omiru examples. And now we are placing 13 more in 4 different points. So an area may have 2, for example, or 3. And I think that's the future, to be honest. And as soon as we have saved some more money, we'll put some more. And hopefully at some point, maybe the next mayor will not need to have these green skivalodochia ugly things all over the city.
Are these general rubbish bins, or are they recycling bins? Because the other thing, of course, is that the small bins that we see around places asking people to put their recyclables are impractical, aren't they? You can't go round and empty them 3 times a day if need be, or whatever. So these are for general rubbish.
Correct.
But what about recycling? It's not certainly the central part of town something that you see people doing regularly. I know you've got those small coloured bins. Are they working, or how often do you have to empty them?
In general, I fully agree. I mean, it's correct. The underground bins, the primary purpose is general garbage. In the future, we may have underground bins for recyclable material. Right now, it's for general garbage. In the walled city, if I understand the question correctly, what do we do regarding recyclable material? Yeah, we actually started because the major issue in the walled city is space in the streets and space in the stores. So a lot of people take out their paper, their cardboards or glass, etc., and they don't have anywhere to put them, and nobody wants more bins. So we have a serious issue. We started 2 or 3 months ago with door-to-door collection of glass bottles from the pedestrian area. It's not, I'm sorry to say, working very well because the owners of the shops, the restaurants and bars are not cooperating as we had hoped. We will now approach them, each one, and explain the benefits and why they should. The cardboards, that's working much better. They take them out. We, the municipality, collect them and take them at the OHI parking space where we have a compactor, and Green Dot comes from there and picks it up. The whole city, it needs special treatment for recyclable material, and we're trying to adjust to that.
And back to the underground bins, you've got to have, I presume, special equipment to empty them.
Yeah.
How are they emptied? Because you've got a huge area underneath this little small chute.
There's a special truck with a crane that actually pulls them up, and then it empties them.
And they still go to landfill, I take it, or do they go to Koshi?
Koshi, the landfill, if you mean Kochadis, does not take any garbage, or the general purpose garbage, or everything goes to Koshi.
So it is, to some degree, dealt with, if you like.
You mean as far as the recyclability of the garbage? Yes, it's much better than it was before going to Kochadis.
The landfill.
No.
What's next in terms of the city's health? I mean, we've talked in the past about air pollution, and this is obviously going to help because rubbish in the streets is another form of air pollution.
I think this should continue because we should not be satisfied with a small part of a larger measure, if you wish. And sometimes I say we have a lot of ideas and very little implementation. This is a very good idea, not mine. As I said, the implementation started in 2012. So somebody took the decision before 2012. I became mayor in 2012. But the important is to continue a good idea. So now we're implementing more, and every year we should implement more until there are no more, at least in the center of Nicosia, no more of
unsightly wheelie bins.
Exactly. So continuing a good idea, implementing it, is actually sometimes tougher than having a new idea. So I think our target would be to continue implementing this every year. Do 10 every year, do 5 every year, add until we don't get any of the...
So that it's rolled out not just in the old town, but also in the other areas.
No, I wouldn't go as far to say everywhere in Nicosia, to be clear. The main...
shopping areas and...
The main in the center of Nicosia, the busiest places, let's say. And as far as our environment, I think this would be important, but the most important, and probably it's not the time, but we should discuss it certainly, is the public transport. I think that is the biggest project that will affect quality of life of Cypriots living in cities. And unfortunately, it's not well dealt with. And I don't think people regarded it as the most important environmental issue we face, and that's a pity.
Well, it would certainly improve the air quality everywhere if more people travelled by bike or bus. And there are plans, I know, in Nicosia to make several roads one way or the other way,
yes,
with bus lanes.
Yeah, but it will not work as well as it should if not all Nicosia, when I say all Nicosia, I mean the urban Nicosia.
If people start coming into work on a bus, for example, that will make a difference.
That means that the measures, the suggestions of the mobility plan needs to be implemented in all municipalities.
And there's the problem.
And that is the problem.
I'm sure it'll be solved eventually.
Let's hope in our lifetime.
That's Nicosia's Mayor Konstantinos Yorkagis talking about the new underground bins which are going to clean up the inner part of our city. And who knows, in a few years perhaps more people will get on the bus or on their bikes.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
In other news, probably the biggest story this week was headline news on Monday and Tuesday. More than 3 years after the Cypriot leaders agreed to open checkpoints at Derinia near Famagusta on the east coast and Lefka Apliki, which is about 50 kilometres from the capital, hundreds of people from both sides queued up early on Monday to make the long-awaited crossing at the new checkpoints. Mixed feelings of delight and anger. There was one very angry woman at Derinia who was harassing people trying to cross, but otherwise, mostly it was hugs, smiles and laughter. By evening, according to the police, some 260 Greek Cypriots, 145 Europeans and 11 third country nationals had crossed from the south to the north. Meanwhile, more than 180 Turkish Cypriots, 146 Europeans and some 19 third country nationals crossed from the north to the south. There had been some opposition to the opening of the checkpoints, particularly grumblings from local businesses who were concerned that locals and tourists would cross to the north to shop, where products tend to be much cheaper, particularly since the fall of the Turkish lira. However, it appeared that on Tuesday there were Turkish Cypriots crossing to the south to shop in Derinia. So it's probably a two-way business. A lot of people, of course, crossed over to look at their abandoned homes, many of them seen crying and taking photographs. But whether this will actually move things forward in the Cyprus negotiations remains to be seen. However, the general feeling seems to be that the more the two sides mingle through things like crossing over to the other side, the better the chances of achieving a sustainable peace on the island.
Listen online to the Cyprus News Digest on YouTube or at cyprusmail.libsyn.com. The latest program is uploaded every Friday, and if you missed one, you can catch up there.
David Gorman is the Eurasia Regional Director for the Centre for Humanitarian Dialogue. When I met up with him recently, he explained what the centre does.
The Center for Humanitarian Dialogue is a Geneva, Switzerland-based organization that does conflict resolution throughout the world. We work in almost 40 conflict theaters around the world, and what we do is we help start peace processes or inject creativity into existing peace processes where they're not moving forward.
When you say inject creativity, I suspect that despite the global differences in all these conflict zones, their creative injection is much the same in all of them.
Well, in some cases, some peace processes are very high profile. They're very much in the limelight. They're very overtly politicized. So there's various reasons why some peace processes have a much harder time at, in fact, being more creative. The participants find it hard because perhaps everything they say is publicized. They find they have very narrow parameters on what to talk about. So what we can do as a non-state, non-governmental actor is we can meet with the parties and bring them together in an unofficial, quiet, closed-door setting where they can talk more openly about how to resolve the conflict. So in that way, we can come up with creative ideas that are off the record, so to speak, and then provide those to the official process so that then they might be able to use them and come up with something more creative than is currently being done.
One of the problems tends to be that opinion can be polarized in the wider population wherever there's a conflict, and you may have small numbers of people who would like to resolve the conflict, but they find it almost dangerous to go public with what they're trying to do. How do you get over that?
Oh, that's right. That's absolutely right. And that's another added piece of value that I think we like to contribute. A lot of people are excluded from the peace process. Many times they're done behind closed doors by just a few people representing the leadership of whichever country or armed group is involved. But what we can do is we can engage with a whole range of actors. That includes marginal groups. That includes members of the general population. That can include those that want more of a voice that don't have it. We can engage more nimbly with them and bring their issues to the table in a constructive way so that they feel that they are more a part of the peace process and their views are being heard and the parties can better respond to them. I think one of the key elements in any peace process is that the public needs to be involved along the way, not just at the end with a referendum. And we've seen in the last few years many referendums around the world which have gone terribly wrong. And I think a part of that is that the policymakers don't quite get where the public is at. And I think it's harder now. Maybe it's because of social media, maybe it's because of increased polarization or what have you, but clearly there's a lot of work that needs to be done to better ensure inclusivity among those who feel disenfranchised from government, from peace processes or what have you.
So you're basically saying that along with this polarization, there's a lack of preparedness, a lack maybe of transparency on the part of whoever is negotiating to explain that it's always a compromise, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. To be fair, and I've been involved in the mediations, in many, and I've been in the closed-door rooms, and frankly, sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, frankly, there's a time and a place for confidential closed-door sessions. Parties need to feel that they can engage outside of the public domain, and therefore they need a quiet space to engage with each other. And so that is important. However, what's just as important is that at some point, sooner than later, they start to brief the public, engage with the public, start to inform the public about what's going on and how it's going, and lay out a vision or a strategy for where this is all going. People need a sense of confidence that they know what this process is leading to, that they know that their core issues are not being compromised, that this is leading to something better than what they had before. And if that public interaction isn't there, then I think eventually the process is going to start to run into troubles in that way. But again, there's a time and a place for public engagement and a time and a place for private engagement.
And the sustainability of any agreement that is reached, wherever it happens to be, is paramount, isn't it? Because if you do reach an agreement and then after a few years it falls apart, things are almost worse than they were before it happened.
One of the key problems in many peace processes is that you'll find that the parties come to an agreement, there's a big public signing ceremony, and then everybody walks away. However, most of the difficult work is actually not just about getting to the agreement, it's actually implementing it. And that's where it often runs into the sand. And that's the key part, because it is hard to galvanize the international community, the national community, to continue on the course. And there will inevitably be some challenges to any agreement, some attempts to roll it back. We've seen this everywhere, Northern Ireland, Philippines, Indonesia, etc. There's always going to be that. And so preparing for that implementation before it actually begins is one of the key lessons that we've all learned, and putting in place the right, what we call architecture of support, whether it be peacekeeping operations or administrative bodies that can help guide the implementation, ensure the funding is there, ensure the support is there. It's absolutely critical. Otherwise, we've seen it all too often that there is a rollback in the implementation, or there are splinter groups that emerge that undermine the whole thing, and you have another conflict emerging.
A lot of people I've spoken to recently have also been talking about the importance of including women in any peace process, because they are actually the ones who have the influence over their families. Very often they're the ones who've been impacted worst by the conflict as well. So they have a great role to play, but they're so often excluded.
More and more they're playing more of a role, but for sure not enough. I was fortunate to be a part of the peace process in the Philippines, where the government of the Philippines wanted to ensure that 40% of their negotiating panel was made of women, and they did. They succeeded in doing that. That actually ended up encouraging the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, their counterpart in the negotiations, to also including women. And it encouraged us as the mediation group to also try to include more women. And I think what we saw from that was that it was critical to have women at the table, partly because of what they represented, as at least 50% of the population, because of the issues that they represented as well, and because they had just been marginalized, but also because of the skill sets that they brought to the table as well, which was a different skill. Men and women often engage differently, and I found in negotiations that I was in, having women at the table, whether it be on the negotiating team or the mediating team, is only an asset, and you're only doing yourself harm and weakening your hand by not having women at the table. And what I find surprising is that it's not better recognized by negotiators of the value that they bring to the table. They're not advancing their cause or their people's cause by not having that broader set of tools in the negotiation or the mediation process. So hopefully we'll see more of that. Many countries have national action plans that aspire to have a certain number of women. I know a lot of people are not big on quotas and such like that, but frankly, I think there is still a need to have a certain number, magic number, so to speak, simply because they've long been excluded in so many peace processes and so many of the administrative mechanisms that it's hard for them to even get close to the negotiation process. So I think what we found in that process in the Philippines was that having women a part of it who may not have met the qualifications on the piece of paper immediately, but within a year they were there. Or less, I shouldn't say a year, much less than that. They were more than able, and in fact able to bring different skills to the negotiation that only helped the parties.
David Gorman, Eurasia Regional Director for the Centre for Humanitarian Dialogue. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.